Ladies and gentlemen, as I indicated to you earlier, we're very proud to now have this opportunity to hear from the Vice President and to introduce the Vice President of the United States. Let me introduce again to you Bernard L. Schwartz.
I want to again thank you all for coming here today. At this time, I am indeed totally privileged to introduce somebody that we all know and admire very much, but it's an important factor for us to have the Vice President here with us today to talk about this very, very important subject. I have known the Vice President for a long time. And I'm happy to say not only do I admire him for his vision, his long-term planning, his intelligent amelioration of the problems of politics, but he's able to talk to both sides of the aisle and get things done. And that's one of the things that's important. When you think in terms that the Vice President started in national politics in 1972, I think it was, when he became a senator from Delaware. That's a long time. And he has been prominent ever since in making things happen in Washington. So we're indeed privileged to have him here today. I might say on a personal note that the Vice President is a good guy. I was born in Brooklyn, and that's a big deal. And I think in Delaware, being a good guy is also a big deal. So I'm very privileged and delighted to be able to say to you, we're being joined today by the Vice President, Mr. Biden. Good to see you. Okay, you take care. I'll let you speak.
All right. Hello, folks.
I feel like I can speak from out here, so I'm including that. Bernard, thank you very, very much. We have a little bit of a mutual admiration society going. Speaking of good guys, one of the most decent people I've ever interacted with in my career has been Bernard Schwartz, and that's been since 1972. It's always discouraging when people remind people that I've been around in the Senate since 1972. When I left the Senate, I was reelected for my 7th term the same year I was elected to the vice presidency. And it's a quirk in Delaware law. You couldn't get off the ballot. It's a long story. But at any rate, so I got sworn in for the 7th time, and they have a thing called at the Republican caucus, where all the Republicans eat lunch together, and then the Democratic caucus once a week. The Senate historian will come in and do a, quote, history minute. And they'll come in and say, in this day in 1871, or this day, and such happened. And so the Senate historian, I think, trying to be nice and make me feel good, he said, this is the last caucus Senator Biden will attend. In 4 days, he'll be sworn in as Vice President of the United States of America. And I think it's important for everyone to know, and if my memory is correct, there are only 13 people in American history who served as long as he did. And I thought, oh my God. Oh my God. At any rate, and speaking of good guys, Ambassador Burns is one of the most talented people I've ever worked with in the area of foreign policy and at the State Department, and it's good to be with him as well. It's great to be here. I mean this sincerely. I'm sorry I did not get a chance to hear Elizabeth's speech. I'm a fan, and she is, I think, one of the most articulate people in the United States Congress, the United States Senate now, and I'm sure she made a persuasive case. And I apologize if I tread on or recover some of the ground that has already been covered. But I've done so many over the last years, since my Senate days, conferences on infrastructure, that I know I sound like a broken record. Matter of fact, my staff kind of looks at me and says, "You're going to say that again?" And speaking of broken records, try it on your grandchildren. I said to my young granddaughter, I know I sound like a broken record. And she said, what's a record, Pop? Not a joke. She thought I meant some Olympic record or something. But look, you're not only surveying the challenges we face on our infrastructure, you're identifying, in my view, the tremendous opportunities we have to strengthen our competitiveness, to drive growth, protect national security, and to generate, begin a virtuous cycle again, to generate literally good-paying middle-class jobs, not just in the construction of the infrastructure, but the spin-off that rolls from that. So I'm here today, first and foremost, to thank Bernard and all of you, and try to put this into a slightly larger context. 6.5 years ago, the economy was in the worst downturn since the Great Recession. When the President and I took office, we knew we had to make some tough and incredibly unpopular decisions. I'm sure some were unpopular with you as well as they were with Democrats and Republicans. The Recovery Act, which was over $800 billion in spending in an 18-month period. TARP, which was voting for, to support TARP in the Congress was like putting rattlesnakes in people's kitchens. I mean, because the very people they blame for the problem were being bailed out. It's hard to explain. Excuse me. Dodd-Frank, the auto rescue, which everybody says now is a great idea, but at the time, 60% of the American people of all stripes thought was a very bad idea. The Affordable Care Act, which was a difficult battle. But as a result of those things, in my humble opinion, and because primarily of the grit of the American people, we've gone from economic crisis to recovery, and I think we're on the cusp of a genuine resurgence in the U.S. economy and U.S. growth. 13.2 million jobs in 67 consecutive months. Unemployment down from 5% to 5.1%. Deficit cut by 2/3. And we're hearing now about your children are going to hear the word insourcing as much as you heard the word outsourcing. Businesses are coming back. They're coming home. And all of you know it because you're prominent business people. A.T. Carnegie does a survey, I think that's the 19th year in a row, don't hold me to the number of years, but for almost 2 decades now. They go to the 300 largest industrialists in the world and they ask the question, what's the best place in the world to invest? This last survey, by a margin larger than any time in America, in the history of the survey, those 300 industrialists said the United States of America in every category, from IT to service to manufacturing. The Boston Consulting Group, some of you may be part of the Boston Consulting Group. They do a similar survey. They survey every company invested in China that has an investment in China. They ask the same questions. What are your plans for next year? If memory serves me correct, 54% this time said they're considering coming back to the United States of America. And they're coming back not because of Barack Obama and Joe Biden. They're coming back because we'll have the cheapest energy for the remainder of this century, at least the next half of this century. They're coming back because we have the best research universities in the world by a factor of 10. We have the greatest and most agile venture capitalist system in the world. We have a rule of law that protects intellectual property, and our workers are 3 times as productive as workers in China, for example. But to keep our edge, to take advantage of this potential resurgence and make it permanent, there's 2 things that we have to do. And this is where I become a broken record. We have to have the best trained workforce in the world. That's for another speech. Or I could just give you copies of the 15 speeches I gave on that subject. But we have to have the best trained workforce in the world. And secondly, we have to have an infrastructure that is consistent with the 21st century needs. Most Americans think we've had the best infrastructure in the world for the last century. The truth of the matter is they're finding out very rapidly we don't now. You're discussing the problems. The problems. Ranked 28th in the world in transportation infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers says we need $3.6 trillion in additional infrastructure investment by 2020. Assume they're off by 50%. Today, only 2 ports in the East Coast, Baltimore and Norfolk, and soon several others, will be able to handle post-Panamax ships. They're twice as big. carry twice as much cargo at 50% less the cost compared to other ships. I took a whole delegation of Republicans and Democrats, mayors, governors, senators, down to the Panama Canal. Some of you have seen it. Go down and look at the eighth wonder of the world. Look at those 2 new locks they have constructed. It's mind-blowing. But because of the age and complexity of our energy infrastructure and the changing nature of the energy mix and the impact of increasingly severe weather, whether it's just accidental or because of global warming, there's a lot of people think global warming doesn't exist. They also doubt gravity. But the entire infrastructure, the entire energy infrastructure, is in need of major upgrades and investment. And that actually is a national security issue beyond being an economic issue. I could go on, but folks, the challenges facing our infrastructure today are not only resolvable, they are potentially a potential game changer for us in a whole range of areas. And the point I want to emphasize, resolving these problems creates a tremendous opportunities for growth and advancement in our economy, for our people, and as I said, for putting the middle class back in the saddle again. For all the recovery we had, the middle class is still badly damaged. First time I never thought I'd live to see the headline in the New York Times several months ago, American middle class no longer wealthiest in the world. When President Xi, I know him well, many private dinners with him traveling through his country when he was vice president several years ago. He once asked me at a dinner that he and I were having with one staff person, he said, "How do you define America?" I said, "I can define America in one word, Mr. President. Possibilities. Possibilities. Possibilities." The middle class has been the glue that's held together our social stability and our political stability. Because the notion that there's a real level playing field and there's a possibility I can improve my lot and the lot of my children. But we know from the beginning that our infrastructure, and we knew this when we took office, needed significant improvement, and it would help grow the economy. That's why we invested $48 billion in transportation infrastructure, the largest public works project since Eisenhower's interstate system, in the Recovery Act, in 18 months. We improved over 6,000 miles of rail, more than 350,000 miles of road, 20,000 bridges. And we did it. The whole Recovery Act cost more than $800 billion. We were vilified for it, and all the waste and fraud it was going to cost. Outside groups, including the Congressional Budget Office, analyzed that there's less than 0.02% waste or fraud in my administering that act. There was none. It was the most competently run program in the history of the United States for the amount of money involved. And it mattered. You know, I've been here for 8 presidents. I don't know many presidents who have not had as their budget priorities or legislative priorities of the Congress I served in that haven't laid out ambitious and long-term investments in our entire infrastructure system. But this is a new Congress. This is a new Republican Party, a different Republican Party, not bad or good, different. That's not the case anymore. There used to be a bipartisan consensus that infrastructure was important. I can understand why there should be a legitimate debate on how we pay for infrastructure. That's always been a debate. But what I don't understand anymore is how there can even be a debate about whether we need to invest in our infrastructure. That's the debate going on, not how to pay. Do we even need to invest in our infrastructure? I've never seen that before. Because we've always known, Democrats and Republicans, those of you who are business people and you go into a city, a county, a town to build a factory or invest, what's the thing you do? You get together and you ask the local officials, well, is there an adequate supply of water? Is there a railhead I can get to? What's my access to interstate highway? Tell me the reliability for energy. That's what you do. That's what you send your people to do, and they compete for you. They compete. It's not just the taxes, they compete. to say, no, 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 our infrastructure will accommodate your needs. You know, if I'm involved in international commerce, can I get my raw materials in, and can I get them out not only to the United States but to the world? Are the reports reliable? Are they efficient? Are they affordable? The bottom line is simple. We need a 21st century infrastructure. It's just basic. I know I got in trouble initially. Said only Biden would say that when I made the reference that if you blindfolded you and I put you in LaGuardia in the middle of the night and in Beijing, you'd think you were in a developing country in LaGuardia. And I got pilloried. Guess what? By everybody except the governor and everybody who works at LaGuardia. And I just went up there and guess what? They're investing billions of dollars to make the greatest city in the world, Mr. Mayor. I love Philadelphia. But it is the greatest city in the world, have a system consistent with being the greatest city in the world. When we were growing by leaps and bounds, and the middle class was growing in a direct correlation between increased productivity, increased middle class wages, if you go back and look, there was a little isolated incidental connection to that. We were also investing 3% of our GDP in infrastructure. It's not the only reason why it occurred. We now invest 1%. And look, the federal government didn't do it alone before and can't do it alone now. We are an indispensable partner for states and local communities that plan to finish projects, repave roads, modernize airports, expand ports. But we cannot do it alone. It's not just transportation. There's an overwhelming need to upgrade, as I made reference to before. You're going to build a facility in a community, you want to know what its stormwater runoff problem is. You want to know if there's access, like Google, to clean water. You want to know where the sewer system functions, because it affects your efficiency. You rely on it. Earlier this year, I was in Philadelphia, Mr. Mayor, and I was up there with Ernie Moniz speaking with the utility facilities that also cover Delaware and parts of New Jersey. And Ernie Moniz, along with the President's Science Advisor, Dr. John Holdren, we released a quadrennial energy review, a roadmap of our entire energy infrastructure and the need to make it more reliable, more resilient, and more secure. The recommendations were many, but the main ones was we have to help states and companies cover the cost of digging up and repairing thousands of miles of gas pipelines and transmission lines that are leaking. There's a problem. We have to accelerate the adoption of new technologies like smart meters to help utility companies respond faster and more efficiently to power outages after extreme weather. I could go on, but I won't in the interest of time. If we don't make these kinds of investments, we're going to be at a competitive disadvantage and a national security disadvantage. As I said before, infrastructure investments create, attract, and retain businesses and generates a virtuous cycle. It's not just the jobs created building the infrastructure. It's not just the jobs created by you hiring people because you're now located where there is an infrastructure that meets your needs and makes you more competitive. It means that more people at the beauty shop are going to be hired, more people at the local diner, more cars are going to be sold at that dealership, more people are going to provide lawn services, etc. It goes down the line. I don't know why we've kind of forgotten how the basic economic system works. By the way, let me explain what I mean by middle class. You know, I have some really bright economists that work for me, and when I first took this job, I'd say middle class, and they'd say $50,270 or $51,400. Middle class isn't a number in America. It's a value set. To be middle class in America means You are able to own your own home and not just rent it. You're able to send your kid to the local park and know they're going to come home safely. You're going to be able to send them to a local high school. If they do well, they qualify for college. If they qualify, you're going to be able to figure out a way to get them there. In the meantime, when your mom or dad dies, you're able to take the other one in and help them. And hope your kids never have to help you. That's middle class. But it relies upon a decent job. Relies upon a decent job. And folks, you know, the jobs we're talking about in infrastructure are not just minimum wage jobs. They're good paying middle class jobs. Surveyors, building highways, $60,000 a year. Civil engineers, $87,000 a year. Construction site managers, $95,000 a year. Let alone the person laying the concrete and running the grader. So let me be clear. I recently saw a lot of this in Detroit, to give you one example. From the beginning, we worked very close with Detroit because we concluded, and whether we were right or wrong, we believed it, this President and I, that you could not let an iconic industry or an iconic city just collapse. So we did a great deal of work generating support and from multiple federal programs, combining it, bringing it in, and they got a great mayor there named Duggan and a good governor named Snyder, a Republican governor. And Detroit is off its back, off its knees, and standing up now. It's beginning to walk. But one of the interesting things we found out in Detroit was that there was a need. They realized badly they had a badly needed desire and need to modernize infrastructure. For example, a simple thing like they didn't have enough streetlights. I mean, 118,000, I think it was. Don't hold me to the number, but we're out. Didn't have the money to screw in new energy-saving bulbs that save them millions of dollars a year. And guess what? They also found out that they didn't have a transportation system anymore. And the vast majority of people in Detroit don't have cars. So a few weeks ago, the mayor asked me, Mayor Duggan, I said, if there's anything I could do for you, this was 5 months ago, what would he say? Joe, can you get me buses? Can you get me buses? So we got him some buses, 49 of them, bought with a $26 million federal grant. We weren't investing in buses. We were investing in the people of Detroit, helping them move up the ladder in the middle class. Detroit, like hundreds of American cities, now face a different problem. It used to be suburban sprawl. Now it's job sprawl. It's job sprawl. The people who live in those cities can't figure out how to get to where the jobs are now. The jobs are in suburbia. They used to be off of Broad Street in Philly. They're now out in Havertown. And so there's emerging academic work that seems to confirm what the mayors and county executives have known all along. People can't move up the ladder of the middle class unless they have access to reliable transportation. They've got to be able to get to the job interview. They've got to be able to show up at work on time. They've got to get home to be able to tuck their families in bed, their kids in bed. So in Detroit, more than 3/4 of the jobs are 10 miles outside the city. The population, they can't get there. This matters because, as Mayor Duggan says, what's good at having a job if you can't get to it? And job sprawl is a problem all across the country. And it's a relatively new phenomenon being recognized by academics and well as practitioners like mayors. It's a problem in Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Youngstown, small towns, my hometown of Scranton. And so these transportation investments in transportation infrastructure, they matter. They matter how people can live, not just where you locate. It takes me back to the legitimate question that we still always have had a disagreement, Democrats and Republicans, even among Democrats. And is, how do you pay for this? The problems are too big. this is too important to keep underfunding infrastructure one little chunk at a time. Did you all ever think we'd get to the point where we couldn't get a consensus how to keep the highway system open and running? Not a joke. 10 years ago, do you think we'd get to the point we couldn't figure out how to fund the highway system other than 1, 3, 5 months at a time? So, we laid out a plan to tackle our transportation challenges. We can disagree about it, and we're open to debate about it. We call it the Grow America Act. It's a 6-year, $478 billion investment in infrastructure. It provides $317 billion over 6 years of national highway systems. Highways, roads, bridge projects, they can move forward with certainty. They know they'll be seen through. We continue the Tiger grants. Since 2009, we've invested $4 billion in those grants, and we've leveraged $14 billion off the sidelines in connection with these grants, generating growth in our entire infrastructure. Third thing we have to do is we have to build on the success of our cutting red tape and expediting the permitting process of major infrastructure projects like the Tappan Zee Bridge and others. We've actually made significant changes in cutting red tape. We have to increase the federal commitment to public transportation by more than 75% to meet the growing demands for buses, rails, and rail lines in our cities and suburbs, rural communities, all around the country. And here's how we pay for it. We pay for it by levying a one-time 14% tax on the over $2 trillion, some estimate it's higher, $2 trillion of corporate profits that are overseas that are not being brought home. So give a break. Instead of taxing at the rate they're supposed to be taxed at if you bring it home, tax it at 14%, that would generate $268 billion to modernize our infrastructure and benefit American business. It seems to me it should be a win-win. The very businesses that will benefit the most are the businesses that can bring home at a much reduced rate the profits that are still remain abroad. Folks, those who question whether we should invest in infrastructure are missing a really big picture. Without investing in our entire system, how can we lead the world in the 21st century? As again, I said we can debate how we pay for these investments, but we can't debate about whether they're necessary. So all the business leaders here today, I say we need your help. That's why I came, as I said initially, I came to say thank you. To make the case that this has to happen. And you can disagree with Barack, with the President and me in terms of how we generate the funding. We are wide open. We are wide open as to how this gets done. You know the little expression, pay me now or pay me later? My dad used to have an expression when someone comes to my dad and say, Joe, let me tell you what I value. My dad would always say, show me your budget, I'll tell you what you value. Seriously. Show me your budget, I will tell you what you value. Tell me you value growth without investing in infrastructure, some of which is literally crumbling. If we don't step up now, the price is going to be extremely high. So I'll end where I began by saying thank you, because you're some of the most prominent people in the country, representing some of the largest businesses in the country. And it matters when you go up in the Hill and you talk to some of our recalcitrant Democratic friends and our Republican friends to say, okay, you don't like the way the President and Biden are trying to fund this, what's your answer? But don't tell me. Don't tell me we don't need this investment. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for having me here. Bernard, thank you very much. See you all later. Thank you.